Lena Carter dropped to her knees in the snow and pressed her hands against a 6-year-old boy's frozen fingers. A boy she'd never met, carried by a man she didn't know, standing at her door at midnight in the worst storm this town had seen in 40 years. She had $12 to her name. She had no heat. She had nothing to give, and she gave everything. What she didn't know was that this broken-looking stranger had just walked away from a $200 million board meeting. And what he didn't know was that this one night would shatter the wall he'd spent 3 years building around his heart. Drop a comment with the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. And if this is your first time here, hit subscribe and follow along. You don't want to miss what happens next. Lena Carter hadn't eaten since yesterday morning. She stood at the kitchen counter, staring at a half cup of rice in a jar and a can of vegetables she'd been saving for 3 days. Her stomach pulled tight, but she'd trained herself to ignore it. Hunger wasn't new. Hunger was Tuesday. She reached for the jar, then stopped. Her phone buzzed on the table. She already knew what it was, another reminder from the electric company. Third notice. 14 days to pay, or they cut the power. She didn't pick it up. There was no point reading the same threat twice. The cabin was cold. Not put on a sweater cold. The kind of cold that gets into your joints and stays there. The wood stove in the corner had gone out 2 hours ago, and she'd used the last of the firewood that morning. She'd meant to chop more, but her double shift at the diner had run late, and by the time she walked the 3 miles home, her arms could barely hold the door open. She twisted the lid off the rice jar. And then the knock. Not a polite knock. Not the kind of knock a neighbor makes when they want to borrow sugar. This was a fist against wood, desperate, rapid, the kind of knock that says, I have nowhere else to go. Lena froze. Nobody knocked on this door. Not anymore. Not since her mother died. The nearest neighbor was 2 miles east, and old Mr. Hadley hadn't come by since the funeral. The mail carrier left packages at the road. Delivery drivers didn't even know this cabin existed. The knock came again. Harder. Lena grabbed the baseball bat from behind the door, the one her mother had kept there for 20 years, and pulled the latch. Wind hit her face like a slap. Snow drove sideways. And standing on her porch, barely visible through the white curtain of the storm, was a man. He was tall, but hunched. His coat was expensive. She could tell that even in the dark, but it was soaked through, useless. His shoes were wrong for this terrain. City shoes. Leather. Ruined. His face was drawn pale, his lips almost blue, and in his arms pressed against his chest was a boy. Small. Maybe 6 years old. Eyes closed. Shaking so hard, his teeth rattled. The man looked at Lena. His voice cracked when he spoke. Please, he said. My car broke down, 3 miles back. I've been walking. I can't, he's freezing. Please. Lena looked at the bat in her hand. She looked at the boy. She looked at the man's eyes, and what she saw there wasn't danger. It was terror. The specific terror of a parent watching their child slip away. She stepped aside. Get in, she said. The man stumbled through the door. He almost fell. Lena caught his arm and steadied him, then closed the door against the howling wind. Put him here, she said, pointing to the couch. It was the only furniture in the room that wasn't broken. The man laid the boy down with a gentleness that made Lena's chest ache. He pulled off the boy's wet shoes, tiny sneakers soaked through, and Lena was already moving. She pulled the wool blanket off her own bed, the only warm one she had. She wrapped it around the boy, tucking it under his chin, the way her mother used to do for her. His name? Lena said. What's his name? Ethan. The man's voice shook. His name is Ethan. Ethan? Lena said softly, close to the boy's ear. You're inside now. You're safe. Can you hear me? The boy's eyes fluttered open. Gray eyes wide and glassy. He looked at Lena like he wasn't sure she was real. There you go, she said. She pressed her palm to his forehead. Cold. Too cold. I need to warm him up. Fast. She turned to the man. What's your name? Daniel, he said. Daniel Reed. Daniel. I need you to hold him close. Body heat. Can you do that? Daniel nodded. He sat on the couch and pulled Ethan into his lap, wrapping his arms around the boy, the blanket between them. His hands were shaking as badly as his son's. Lena moved to the kitchen. She lit the gas burner, the stove still worked, thank God, and put water on to boil. She looked at the rice, half a cup, the can of vegetables. It was everything she had. She poured the rice into the pot. Daniel watched her from the couch. You don't have to... Stop, she said without turning around. You don't get to tell me what I have to do in my own house. He went quiet. The water boiled. She added the vegetables, stirred. The smell filled the small room, simple, warm, alive. Lena poured it into 2 bowls. She carried them to the couch. Here, she said, handing one to Daniel. Give him small bites. Slow. Daniel took the bowl. He looked at it, then at her. Where's yours? He asked. I already ate, she said. It was a lie. They both knew it was a lie, but Daniel didn't push. He spooned a small bite into Ethan's mouth. The boy chewed slowly, his eyes still half closed, but color was returning to his face. Lena sat on the floor across from them, her back against the cold wall. She watched the boy eat and felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: purpose. A reason to be in this room, in this house, on this night. How far did you walk? She asked. 3 miles, maybe more. I lost the road for a while. In this storm, with a child. Daniel's jaw tightened. I didn't have a choice. There's a gas station 7 miles south. They have a phone. I couldn't make it 7 miles, not carrying him. So you came north. I saw your light, Daniel said quietly. Through the trees, just a small light. I thought if there's a light, there's someone. Lena glanced at the single lamp in the corner. She'd almost turned it off an hour ago to save electricity. Lucky I'm bad at saving money, she said. Something crossed Daniel's face, not quite a smile, but close. Ethan finished the bowl. His shaking had slowed. His breathing deepened. Within minutes, he was asleep in his father's arms, his small hand gripping Daniel's shirt. The room was quiet, except for the wind outside. You live alone? Daniel asked. Yes. Family. My mother, Lena said. She passed 2 years ago. I'm sorry. Don't be. She fought hard. Cancer doesn't care how hard you fight. Lena paused. What about you? Where's his mother? Daniel didn't answer immediately. He looked down at Ethan's sleeping face. Gone, he said. 3 years. Gone as in dead, Daniel said. The word came out flat, practiced, like he'd said it so many times it had lost its edges. Car accident. She was coming home from work. A truck ran a red light. That was it. One phone call and everything I built was... He stopped, swallowed. Sorry, you didn't ask for my life story. I opened my door at midnight in a blizzard, Lena said. I think we're past small talk. Daniel looked at her, really looked at her for the first time. She was young, mid-20s, thin in a way that wasn't natural, that spoke of skipped meals and long hours. Her clothes were worn, her hands rough. But her eyes were steady, unafraid. How old are you? He asked. 25. And you live here alone, in the middle of nowhere. It was my mother's house. She grew up here, died here. Lena pulled her knees to her chest. I stayed because there was nothing to leave for. What about school career? I dropped out, she said. Junior year. Mom got sick. The bills, you can't imagine the bills. I worked 2 jobs, sometimes 3. By the time she passed, I owed more than I'd ever earn. So I came back here. It's paid off. The house, at least. And the electricity? Lena looked at the notice on the table. 14 days, she said. I'll figure it out. I always do. Daniel said nothing, but something shifted behind his eyes. You're judging me, Lena said. No, Daniel said. I'm trying to understand how someone with nothing gives away what little she has to a stranger. Because he's a kid, Lena said, nodding toward Ethan. And he was cold. That's not complicated, Daniel. That's just being a person. Daniel stared at her. In his world, the world of boardrooms and billion-dollar mergers of people who smiled at your face and aimed for your throat, what she just said was incomprehensible. Generosity without strategy. Kindness without calculation. He hadn't encountered it in so long he'd forgotten it existed. You're a good person, Lena, he said. No, she said. I'm a broke person who knows what cold feels like. The candle on the table flickered. The gas burner had warmed the room just enough to take the edge off, but Lena could still see her breath. She pulled her thin jacket tighter. You gave him your blanket, Daniel said. He needed it more. You're freezing. I've been freezing since October. I'll live. Daniel shifted. Ethan gently pulled off his own coat, still damp but heavy, and held it out to her. Take it, he said. Your coat is wet. Take it anyway. She stared at him for a moment, then took the coat and draped it over her shoulders. It smelled like cologne and rain. They sat in silence for a while. The storm howled. The walls creaked. Can I ask you something? Lena said. Go ahead. What kind of man drives through these mountains in a storm like this with a 6-year-old in the car? Daniel's face changed. The vulnerability she'd seen a moment ago vanished, replaced by something harder. A man who made a mistake, he said. That's not an answer. It's the only one I have tonight. Lena studied him. There was more to this. She could feel it. The expensive coat, the city shoes, the way he spoke, careful, controlled, like every word was measured. This wasn't a man who got lost. This was a man who was running from something. But she didn't push. Not tonight. You want to know something? Lena said. My mother used to say that God sends people to your door when they need you. But I think it's the other way around. I think he sends them when you need them. Daniel looked at her. What do you need, Lena? She thought about it. Really thought. To matter, she said quietly. To someone. For one night. To know that all of this... She gestured at the crumbling cabin, the empty cupboards, the unpaid bills, wasn't for nothing. Ethan stirred in Daniel's arms. Without waking, the boy reached out a small hand and grabbed Lena's finger. He held on tight. Lena looked at those tiny fingers wrapped around hers and felt her throat close. I think you matter tonight, Daniel said. She didn't respond. She couldn't. An hour passed, then 2. They talked. Not about money or jobs or the storm. They talked about grief, about the way the world keeps moving when you stop, about the sound a house makes when there's no one left in it. Daniel told her about the morning after his wife died, how he'd gone to work because he didn't know what else to do, how he'd signed a $100 million deal that afternoon and felt absolutely nothing, how his assistant had found him at midnight, still at his desk, staring at a photo on his phone. I built an empire, he said, and I can't get my own son to look at me. He's looking at you right now, Lena said. Daniel glanced down. Ethan's eyes were open, not fully just slits, but he was looking up at his father's face with an expression that wasn't fear or sadness. It was something softer. Hey, buddy, Daniel whispered. Dad, Ethan said. His voice was small and hoarse. Is this lady nice? Daniel looked at Lena. Yeah, he said. She's the nicest person I've met in a long time. Can we stay? Ethan asked. We'll stay tonight, Daniel said. No. Ethan gripped his father's shirt tighter. Can we stay? Daniel didn't answer. He just held his son closer. Lena stood up. She needed to move to do something to keep her hands busy before the emotion in the room swallowed her whole. She went to the kitchen and boiled more water for tea this time, though she only had 1 tea bag left. She split it between 2 cups and brought them back. Daniel took his. He sipped. He grimaced. "It's weak," Lena said. "It's perfect," he said. And he meant it. Outside the storm raged. Inside something else was happening, something neither of them had language for. Not romance, not charity. Something more fundamental. Two broken people recognizing each other's fractures. Ethan fell asleep again this time with his head on Lena's lap. She ran her fingers through his hair without thinking the way her mother had done for her 1,000 times. Daniel watched. His eyes were red, but he didn't look away. "When was the last time someone took care of him like that?" Lena asked. 3 years, Daniel said. 3 years. What about nannies, babysitters? He's had 12 nannies in 3 years. He won't let any of them close. He screams. He throws things. Last one quit after a week. But he's letting me. "I know," Daniel said. And his voice broke. Just slightly. Just enough. "I know." The candle burned low. The shadows deepened. Lena's eyes grew heavy, but she fought sleep. She didn't trust it, not with strangers in the house, not on a night like this. "Sleep," Daniel said. "I'll stay awake. I don't sleep when there are people in my house." "When was the last time there were people in your house?" The question landed harder than he intended. 2 years, Lena said. "The night my mother died. The hospice nurses left at 3 a.m. I sat in this chair until sunrise. Then I sat here the next day, and the day after that." "Lena." "Don't," she said. "I'm not telling you this for pity. I'm telling you because you should know who opened the door for you tonight. Not a saint, not a hero. Just a woman who knows what it feels like to be alone in the cold with no one coming." Daniel set down his teacup. "I have something to tell you," he said. "Then tell me." "Not tonight." He paused. "In the morning. In the morning I'll tell you everything." That sounds like the kind of thing people say before bad news. "It's not bad," Daniel said. "It's just complicated." Lena looked at him for a long time, at his ruined shoes and his damp coat, and the sleeping boy in her lap, and the storm shaking the walls of the only home she had left. "Everything's complicated," she said, "especially the simple things." Daniel almost smiled. Almost. The hours crawled by. At some point, Lena lost the battle with exhaustion and drifted off, her head resting against the arm of the couch, one hand still resting on Ethan's back. Daniel stayed awake. He looked around the cabin. The patched walls. The leaking roof. The photograph of a woman who looked like an older version of Lena, same eyes, same stubborn jaw. He looked at the electricity notice on the table. He looked at the empty cupboard doors hanging open in the kitchen. And he looked at his son sleeping peacefully, for the first time in 3 years, in the lap of a woman who had nothing and gave it all. Something cracked inside Daniel Reed. Not broke. Cracked. The way a frozen river cracks in spring, violent and necessary and inevitable. He pulled out his phone. Dead battery. He put it back. It didn't matter. What he needed to do couldn't be done with a phone call. He sat in that cold cabin in that dying light, and he made a decision. Not a business decision. Not a strategic move. The most human decision he'd made in 3 years. He just didn't know yet how much it would cost. Dawn was 4 hours away, and with it, everything would change. The first light came gray and thin through the cabin window, and Lena woke to a sound she couldn't place. It wasn't the wind. The storm had died sometime in the early hours, leaving behind a silence so deep it pressed against her eardrums. It wasn't Ethan. The boy was still curled on the couch, breathing slow and even under the wool blanket. And it wasn't Daniel, who stood at the window with his back to her, his body rigid, his hand gripping the sill. It was engines. Multiple engines. Low and heavy, growling up the mountain road. Lena sat up fast. Her neck ached from sleeping against the couch arm. She blinked, trying to make sense of the sound. Nobody drove up this road. Not in winter. Not after a storm like last night's. Daniel, she said. He didn't turn around. Daniel, what is that? I'm sorry, he said. 2 words. Quiet. Loaded with something she couldn't read. Before she could respond, headlights swept across the front wall of the cabin. Then another set. Then another. The engines cut off one by one, and doors opened. She could hear them. Heavy doors, the kind that belonged to vehicles much larger than anything that had business being on this road. Lena was on her feet. She moved to the window and looked past Daniel's shoulder. 3 black SUVs sat in her yard. Big ones, the kind with tinted windows and government plates. Men were stepping out, 4, 5, 6 of them, all wearing dark suits, all moving with the kind of coordinated urgency that said this was not a casual visit. What the hell is this? Lena said. Daniel finally turned to face her. His expression was something she'd never seen on another person before, a mixture of relief and dread and shame so deep it aged him 10 years in the space of a breath. I need to tell you something, he said. You said that last night. You said you'd tell me in the morning. Her heart was hammering. It's morning, Daniel. A knock at the door. Sharp, professional. Mr. Reed. A voice from outside, deep clipped. Mr. Reed, are you in there? We've been searching all night, sir. Lena's stomach dropped. Mr. Reed. Not Daniel. Not, hey buddy, glad you're okay. Mr. Reed. The way you address someone with power, someone who matters to people with suits and SUVs, and the resources to search a mountain in a blizzard all night long. She took a step back from Daniel, then another. Who are you? She said. Lena. Who are you? And don't give me your name. I have your name. I want to know who you are. Daniel opened his mouth, but the door opened first. A man in a black overcoat stepped inside without waiting for permission. He was in his 50s, built like a wall with a face that had never learned how to smile. Behind him, 2 more men entered, scanning the room, the way people scan rooms when they're trained to identify threats. The first man's eyes locked on Daniel. Sir, are you injured? I'm fine, Marcus. And the boy? He's fine. He's sleeping. Marcus glanced at Lena. It was a quick look, efficient, the kind of look that assessed and categorized in under a second. She saw herself through his eyes. Young woman, worn clothes, shabby, cabin nobody. He dismissed her instantly and turned back to Daniel. The board has been in emergency session since midnight. Peterson called the governor's office. There's a helicopter standing by in Ridgefield. We need to move. Give me a minute, Daniel said. Sir, with respect, we don't have a minute. The stock dropped 4% on the news of your disappearance. Every network in the country is running the story. Your face is on CNN right now. Lena heard every word, but the words didn't assemble into anything that made sense. Stock, board, governor's office, CNN. Daniel, she said. Her voice was steady, but only because she was forcing it to be. What is he talking about? Marcus looked at her again. This time not dismissively, curiously, like he was recalculating. Daniel took a breath. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she'd seen him make a dozen times last night, but now it looked different. It looked like the gesture of a man who ran board meetings, not a man who got lost in a storm. My name is Daniel Reed, he said. I'm the CEO of Meridian Industries. The name hit the air and just sat there. Lena knew the name. Everyone knew the name. Meridian Industries was on buildings, on products, on the news every other week. Daniel Reed, she'd seen that face before she realized now. On magazine covers. On business channels in the background at the diner where she worked. She'd poured coffee while his face talked silently on a mounted television, and she hadn't made the connection, because why would she? Why would the CEO of a billion-dollar corporation be standing on her porch in the middle of the night carrying a freezing child, begging for shelter? No, Lena said. Lena, let me explain. No. She shook her head. You know. You're not. You were shaking. Your lips were blue. You couldn't stand up straight. You ate my rice. You drank my tea. You—" She stopped. Her face flushed so hard it hurt. "You let me give your son my only blanket. You let me think you were that you had nothing, that you were like you," Daniel said quietly. The words hit her like a fist. She stepped back and bumped into the kitchen counter. Her hand found the edge and gripped it. She wasn't angry yet. Not fully. She was still in the stage before anger, the stage where the humiliation is so fresh it hasn't decided what to become. "Lena," Daniel said. He took a step toward her. "Don't." She held up her hand. "Just don't." Marcus cleared his throat. "Sir, we really need to go." "I said give me a minute." Daniel's voice cracked through the cabin like a whip. Marcus went still. The two men behind him went still. Even the air seemed to stop moving. Daniel turned back to Lena. "I didn't lie to you," he said. "Everything I told you last night was true. My car broke down. I was carrying my son through a storm. I was desperate. I saw your light. I knocked. Those are the facts. You left out the part where you own half the eastern seaboard. Because it didn't matter. It didn't matter? No, it didn't. Not last night. Not in this house. In this house I was a father with a cold child and nowhere to go. That's all I was. And you?" His voice caught. He steadied it. "You treated me like that's all I was. Do you know how long it's been since someone treated me like a human being instead of a net worth?" Lena stared at him. Her eyes burned, but she would not cry. Not in front of these men. Not in front of anyone. "You could have called someone," she said. "You have people. Clearly you have people. 6 men just walked into my house. My phone was dead. You could have told me. At any point last night you could have said, 'Hey Lena, by the way, I run a Fortune 500 company.' You could have warned me so I wouldn't sit here feeling like a fool." "You're not a fool. I gave a billionaire my last meal." Her voice cracked. She pressed her hand to her mouth, held it there for a moment, then dropped it. "I sat there and told you I couldn't pay my electricity bill. I told you about my mother. I told you—" She stopped. Her face twisted. "I told you I wanted to matter to someone. Do you know how that sounds now? Do you know what that looks like? It looks like the bravest thing anyone's ever said to me." "Don't do that," Lena said. "Don't turn this into something beautiful. I'm humiliated, Daniel. I'm standing in a house with a leaking roof in front of men who probably make more in a week than I make in a year, and I'm humiliated." Ethan stirred on the couch. The voices had reached him. He sat up slowly, the blanket falling off his shoulders, and looked around with the confused expression of a child waking in an unfamiliar place. His eyes found Lena first. "Miss Lena," he said. Her anger cracked. Just slightly. Just enough to let something softer through. "Hey, sweetheart," she said. "Good morning. Are those men here for us?" "They're here for your dad, buddy." Ethan looked at Daniel, then at Marcus, then back at Lena. His lower lip trembled. "I don't want to go," he said. "Ethan," Daniel said gently, "we have to go. People are waiting." "I don't want to go." The boy's voice rose. He pulled the blanket up around himself and pressed back into the couch. "I want to stay here. I want to stay with Miss Lena." Marcus exchanged a glance with one of the other men. Daniel saw it. It was the glance of professionals recalibrating a situation that had just become more complicated than expected. Daniel crouched in front of his son. "Ethan, look at me." "Oh." The boy refused. He turned his face into the couch cushion. "Ethan, please." "You're going to take me back to the big house," Ethan said into the cushion. "And it's going to be cold again." Daniel flinched. Lena saw it, a full-body flinch, like the boy had struck him. "The big house isn't cold, buddy. It's cold, Dad." Ethan turned his face just enough to look at his father. His eyes were wet. "It's always cold. Even when the heat is on. It's cold because nobody's there. Just you and me and people who don't stay." The room went silent. Marcus looked at the floor. Even he, a man who had spent 20 years in private security and had seen things that would break most people, even he looked away from that. Daniel reached out and pulled his son into his arms. He held him tight, his eyes closed, his jaw clenched. "I know," he whispered. "I know it's cold. I'm sorry." Lena watched them. The anger in her chest was still there, but it was changing shape, transforming into something more complex. She was angry and moved and confused and exhausted all at the same time, and she didn't know which emotion to follow. She followed the one she always followed, the one her mother had taught her. She walked to the couch, knelt down, and put her hand on Ethan's back. "Hey," she said, "listen to me. You have to go with your dad. But that doesn't mean tonight didn't happen okay. Tonight was real. You were brave. You walked through a storm and you survived. You remember that." Ethan turned and threw his arms around Lena's neck. He held on with a ferocity that almost knocked her off balance. She caught herself and held him back, one hand on the back of his head, her eyes closed. Daniel watched, and whatever wall he'd been rebuilding since Marcus walked through the door crumbled again. "Lena," he said. "Don't," she whispered. "Not yet. Let me have this." She held the boy for a long time. Nobody in the room moved. Nobody spoke. The men in suits stood at the edges of the room and waited because even they could recognize a moment that outranked their urgency. Finally, Ethan loosened his grip. He pulled back and looked at Lena with those gray eyes, his father's eyes, she realized now. "Will I see you again?" he asked. Lena looked at Daniel over the boy's shoulder. Daniel's face was open raw, stripped of every defense he owned. "I don't know, sweetheart," she said, "but I hope so." She stood up. Her legs were shaking. She stepped back, putting distance between herself and the couch, between herself and these people who were about to walk out of her life and back into a world she could never touch. Daniel stood too. He carried Ethan to Marcus, who took the boy with practiced ease and a gentleness that surprised Lena. "Take him to the car," Daniel said. "Heat on full. There's a blanket in the back of the lead vehicle." "I want Miss Lena's blanket," Ethan said. Everyone looked at Lena. She pulled the wool blanket off the couch and handed it to Marcus. "Take it," she said. "He needs it more than I do." Marcus took the blanket and carried Ethan out. The other two men followed. The door closed behind them. Daniel and Lena were alone. The cabin felt enormous now, empty in a way it hadn't been empty before. The ghost of the night hung between them, the rice, the tea, the conversations about grief, the boy's hand gripping her finger in the dark. "I need to go," Daniel said. "I know. I need you to know that last night was not, I wasn't playing a part. I wasn't slumming it. I wasn't conducting some social experiment. I was lost and I was scared, and you were the only light for miles. Okay? That's all you're going to say." Lena folded her arms. "What do you want me to say, Daniel? You want me to say it's okay. It's okay. You want me to say I'm not angry? I'm still angry. You want me to say last night meant something to me? It did, but it meant something to a girl who thought she was helping a regular man. And now I don't know what it means." Daniel reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a card. Plain white. Simple. Just a name and a phone number. "This is my personal line," he said. "Not my office. Not my assistant. Me. I'm asking you to call it." "Why?" "Because what happened in this house mattered, and I don't want to be the kind of man who walks away from things that matter." He set the card on the kitchen counter. Lena didn't touch it. She didn't look at it. "I've had people walk into this house and walk out before," she said. "The hospice nurses. The pastor after the funeral. The bank manager who came to assess the property. They all said they'd come back. Nobody came back. I'm not them. You're a billionaire, Daniel. You're literally the most them a person can be." He took that. He didn't argue. He didn't defend himself. "You're right," he said. "You have no reason to trust me. You have no reason to believe a word I say. I'm a man who showed up in the dark and turned out to be something other than what I appeared. I get it." He walked to the door. His hand rested on the handle. "But Lena, you showed up in the dark too. And you were exactly what you appeared to be. Do you know how rare that is?" He opened the door. Cold air rushed in. Outside, the SUVs were running their exhaust pluming white in the frozen morning. "Your son is waiting," Lena said. "I know." He paused in the doorway. "One more thing." "What?" "You said last night that you wanted to matter, that you wanted to know all of this wasn't for nothing." He looked back at her. "It wasn't for nothing, Lena. I promise you that." He walked out. The door closed. Lena stood in her kitchen in her empty cabin in the silence that rushed back in like water filling a hole. She looked at the white card on the counter. She looked at the couch where Ethan had slept. She looked at the 2 empty teacups still sitting on the floor. She picked up the cups, carried them to the sink, and washed them. Slowly, methodically, the way you do something small when you can't process something big. Then she sat down at her kitchen table in front of the unpaid electricity notice, and she put her head in her hands. She didn't cry. Lena Carter had stopped crying 2 years ago when she realized tears didn't pay bills, didn't bring back the dead, didn't fix leaking roofs or fill empty cupboards. She'd stopped because crying was a luxury, and luxuries were for people who could afford them. But her hands were shaking, and something in her chest, something she'd locked away so deep she'd forgotten it was there, was knocking. Like a fist on a door. Desperate, rapid, asking to be let in. The card sat on the counter. She didn't pick it up. But she didn't throw it away either. Outside, the last SUV pulled away its tires, crunching through the fresh snow, and the mountain went quiet again. The kind of quiet that fills a house when someone who was supposed to stay has left. The kind of quiet that is not peace, but the absence of everything that almost was. Lena Carter sat alone in her cabin. She'd been alone before, but this was the first time it felt like a choice had been taken from her. She looked at the white card one more time. Then she got up, put on her coat, and walked out the back door to chop wood, because the stove was cold, and the day was long, and she had learned a long time ago that the only cure for a broken heart was a tired body. She swung the axe, and the wood split clean. She swung it again. And again. Each swing harder than the last until her arms ached and her breath came in clouds, and the pile at her feet was enough to last a week. She dropped the axe. She leaned against the chopping block, and for the first time in 2 years, Lena Carter let herself wonder what would happen if she picked up the phone and called a number she had no business calling. She didn't call, not that day. But she carried the card inside and put it in the drawer next to her mother's photograph. And every time she opened that drawer, for the next 3 weeks, it was there. Waiting. Patient. Like the man who left it. 3 weeks passed and Lena didn't call. She went back to her life, or what was left of it. She pulled double shifts at the diner on Tuesdays and Thursdays. She stocked shelves at the hardware store on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Saturdays. She walked the 3 miles to town and the 3 miles back because the truck her mother had left her hadn't started since November, and the mechanic wanted $400 she didn't have. She ate what she could afford, which was never enough. She slept when her body gave her no other option. She kept the wood stove going because she'd chopped enough to last, and she counted down the days on the electricity notice like a prisoner counting days on a wall. 11 days left, then 10, then 9. And every night, she opened the drawer next to her mother's photograph, and she looked at the white card, and she closed the drawer again. It was Ruth who finally broke through. Ruth Mackey was 67 years old, owned the diner where Lena worked, and had the kind of face that had seen everything twice and was no longer impressed by any of it. She'd known Lena's mother. She'd hired Lena the week after the funeral, not out of charity, but because she needed a waitress, and Lena needed a reason to get out of bed. It was a Wednesday. Lena was wiping down the counter after the lunch rush. Ruth was counting the register. The diner was empty except for old Carl Peterson nursing his third cup of decaf in the corner booth, same as every day. "You look like hell," Ruth said without looking up from the bills. "Thanks, Ruth." "I'm serious. You've lost weight. Your eyes are doing that thing they do when you haven't slept. And you spilled coffee on table 4 twice today. You never spill coffee." "I'm fine." Ruth stopped counting. She looked at Lena over the rim of her glasses. "Girl, I have buried 2 husbands and raised 4 children. Do not sit in my diner and tell me you're fine when you are clearly not fine." Lena wrung out the rag and hung it over the faucet. She leaned against the counter and crossed her arms. "Something happened," she said. "I gathered. A few weeks ago, the night of the big storm, a man showed up at my door. He had a little boy with him. His car broke down. I let them in." Ruth's eyes narrowed. "You let a stranger into your house in the middle of the night?" "He had a kid, Ruth. The boy was half frozen. And I fed them. I gave them my blanket. We talked all night. And in the morning," Lena paused. She pressed her lips together. "In the morning, a bunch of men in suits showed up, and it turned out he's Daniel Reed." Ruth stared at her. "Daniel Reed," Ruth repeated. "Yeah. The Daniel Reed Meridian Industries. Daniel Reed. The man who's on the cover of Forbes every other month. That's the one." Ruth set down the stack of bills. She pulled off her glasses. She rubbed her eyes. "Lord have mercy," she said. "He left me his card, his personal number. He told me to call." "And did you?" "No." "Why the hell not?" Lena looked at Ruth like the answer was obvious. "Because I'm a waitress who can't pay her light bill and he's a billionaire, Ruth. What am I going to say? 'Hi, Daniel, thanks for eating my rice, want to chat?' Yes, that's exactly what you're going to say. It's not that simple." "It's exactly that simple." Ruth came around the counter and stood in front of Lena. She was a full head shorter, but she had the presence of a woman 3 times her size. "Listen to me. I knew your mother for 40 years. She was the most stubborn, most prideful, most hard-headed woman in this county, and I loved her for it. But her pride kept her from asking for help when she needed it, and it killed her. You hear me? She waited too long to go to the doctor because she didn't want to be a burden, and by the time she went, it was too late." "Ruth." "I am not finished." Ruth held up one finger. "You are 25 years old. You are smart. You work harder than anyone I know, and you are drowning. You're drowning Lena, and a man threw you a rope, and you're standing there staring at it because you're too proud to grab on." "It's not pride," Lena said. "It's... What is it?" Lena's chin trembled. She caught it, steadied it. "I don't want to be a charity case," she said. "I don't want to be a story he tells at dinner parties. Oh, you'll never believe what happened. I got stranded in the mountains and this poor girl fed me her last meal. Isn't that charming? Isn't that inspiring? We gave her some money and fixed her up. I don't want to be that, Ruth. I'd rather freeze." Ruth was quiet for a moment. Then she reached out and took Lena's hands. "Baby girl," she said, "did it occur to you that maybe he's not offering charity? That maybe something happened in that house that meant something to him too?" Lena didn't answer. "You said his boy was half frozen. You said the man was shaking. You said you talked all night about real things, grief loss, being alone. And you think that was nothing to him. You think a man like that hands out his personal phone number to everyone who gives him a bowl of rice. I don't know what he does. Then find out. Call the damn number." Lena pulled her hands free. She picked up the rag and started wiping the counter again, even though it was already clean. "I'll think about it," she said. "You've been thinking about it for 3 weeks. Thinking is done. Now it's time to do something." Carl Peterson looked up from his decaf. "She's right, you know," he said. "Mind your business, Carl," Lena said. "I'm 74 years old," Carl said. "I don't have enough business left to mind. Call the man." Lena almost laughed. Almost. That night she sat at her kitchen table with the white card in her hands. She turned it over. Twice. 3 times. She picked up her phone and dialed the number halfway, then deleted it. She dialed it again, got to the last digit, and hung up. She put the card down. She picked it up. She dialed the full number and pressed call before she could change her mind. It rang 3 times. Hello? A man's voice. Daniel's voice. She recognized it immediately, the same measured, careful tone from that night, but different now. Warmer, like he'd been waiting. It's Lena, she said. Lena Carter. From the, I know who you are, Lena. Silence. The kind that buzzes. I didn't think you'd call, he said. I almost didn't. About 50 times. What changed your mind? A 67-year-old diner owner and a 74-year-old man who drinks too much decaf. Daniel made a sound that might have been a laugh. I want to see you, he said. Why? Because I owe you a conversation, a real one. Not the kind we had that night. I mean a conversation where I'm not hiding who I am and you're not giving away your last meal. I don't need your money, Daniel. I'm not offering money. Then what are you offering? A pause, longer than she expected. An opportunity, he said. But I'd rather explain in person. Can you come to the city? Daniel, I can barely get to town. My truck doesn't run and I walk 3 miles each way to work. Coming to the city isn't exactly in my calendar. I'll send a car. No. Lena. I said no. I'm not arriving at your office in the back of a black SUV like some kind of no. If we're going to talk, you come here. You know where I live. You've slept on my couch. Another pause. Then, okay, when? Saturday. I'm off at 2. I'll be there at 3. Daniel. Yeah. Come alone. No Marcus. No suits. No SUVs. You show up at my door the same way you showed up the first time, or don't show up at all. I'll be alone, he said. And Daniel. Yeah. Eat before you come. I'm not feeding you again. This time, he definitely laughed. A real laugh. The kind that comes from a place that hasn't been used in a while. She hung up and sat in her kitchen for a long time staring at the phone. Her heart was pounding, and she hated that it was pounding because pounding hearts meant hope, and hope was the most dangerous thing a person like Lena Carter could afford to feel. Saturday came. Lena worked the morning shift at the diner. Ruth watched her like a hawk. You're wearing lipstick, Ruth said. It's chapstick. That's lipstick. I've been wearing lipstick since 1976. I know lipstick. Ruth, please. I'm just saying. Chapstick doesn't have color. Lena ignored her and finished her shift. She walked home, changed into the cleanest clothes. She had a pair of jeans with no holes and a sweater her mother had knitted 3 winters ago, and waited. At exactly 3 o'clock, she heard a car pull up. She looked out the window. Not an SUV. A plain silver sedan. Rental plates. And Daniel Reed stepped out alone wearing jeans boots and a jacket that looked like he'd bought it at a gas station on the way up. He was carrying a paper bag. Lena opened the door. You're on time, she said. I've been sitting in the car for 20 minutes, he said. I was early. I didn't want to seem eager. And the bag. Groceries. You told me to eat before I came, but I figured you could use a few things. I told you I don't need. It's groceries, Lena. Rice, vegetables, some chicken, a box of tea. It's not a yacht. She looked at the bag. She looked at him. She stepped aside. Get in, she said. The same 2 words she'd said that first night. They both noticed. Neither mentioned it. He walked in and set the bag on the counter. The cabin looked the same, except for one thing: the electricity was still on. She'd scraped together enough to pay the minimum. $7.43 left in her account until next Friday. Daniel stood in the middle of the room and looked around. In daylight, without the storm, without the terror of a freezing child in his arms, the place looked different, smaller, more fragile. Sit down, Lena said. I'll make tea. I thought you weren't feeding me. Tea isn't food. Sit. He sat at the kitchen table, Lena boiled water and opened the box of tea he'd brought, real tea, not the single bag scraps she'd been reusing, and made 2 cups. She set one in front of him and sat across the table. "Talk," she said. Daniel wrapped his hands around the cup. He took a breath. "After that night," he said, "I went back to the city. I went back to my office. I sat in a meeting about a merger that would have added $2 billion to the company's value. And I couldn't focus, couldn't think. All I could think about was a woman in a cabin who gave away her last blanket." "Daniel, let me finish, please." He looked at her. "I went home that night, and Ethan was already asleep. The nanny, the 13th nanny, was sitting in the living room watching television. She didn't even look up when I walked in. I went to Ethan's room and he was sleeping, but he was holding something. I pulled back the covers, and it was your blanket. That old wool blanket you gave him. He'd refused to let anyone take it." Lena's throat tightened. The next morning at breakfast, Ethan looked at me and said, "Dad, when are we going back to see Miss Lena?" And I said, "I don't know, buddy." And he said, "She told me I was brave. Nobody ever told me I was brave before." And I realized something, Lena. I realized that in one night, in a house with nothing, you gave my son something that 12 nannies, 3 therapists, and every toy money could buy hadn't given him. You gave him the feeling that somebody was paying attention. Lena set down her cup. Her hands were unsteady, and she didn't want him to see. "So I'm not here with charity," Daniel said. "I'm here with something else entirely." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folder. Not a fancy folder. A plain manila one, the kind you buy at an office supply store. He placed it on the table between them. "What is that?" Lena said. "Open it." She opened it. Inside were 2 documents. She read the first one slowly. Then she read it again. "This is a scholarship," she said. "Full ride, State University. Any program you want. Tuition, books, housing, everything. It's through my foundation." "You have a foundation?" "I do now. I started it last week. After that night I've given money to causes for years. Tax write-offs, PR moves. I never once looked at who the money went to. I never put a face to it. Now I have a face." "Daniel, I can't accept this." "Read the second document." She looked at the second page. It was an offer letter. Paid internship. Meridian Industries. Starting whenever she was ready. "This isn't charity," Daniel said. "This is me investing in someone who showed me more character in one night than most people show in a lifetime. You're smart, Lena. You're resilient. You dropped out of school because you had to, not because you wanted to. I'm giving you a chance to go back. And what do you get out of it?" "Excuse me, what do you get? Don't look at me like that. I've been poor my whole life, Daniel. Nobody gives you something for nothing. What's the angle?" Daniel sat back in his chair. He looked at her for a long time. "You want the truth?" he said. "Always. I get to sleep at night. That's what I get. I get to close my eyes and know that I did one thing, one real thing, that wasn't about money or power or market share. I get to tell myself that the night my car broke down wasn't just bad luck. It was something else, something I needed." Lena was quiet. "And if I say no," she said, "then you say no. I drive back to the city. You keep working 2 jobs. The scholarship goes to someone else, and we both pretend that night didn't happen. Can you pretend it didn't happen?" "No," he said. "Can you?" Lena looked at the documents on the table. She looked at the walls of the cabin, the patched spots, the photograph of her mother, the drawer where she'd kept his card for 3 weeks. "My mother wanted me to go to college," she said quietly. She talked about it every day, even when she was sick. Even at the end, she'd say, "Lena, promise me you'll go back to school." And I'd say, "I promise, Mama." And I knew I was lying. I knew there was no way. I knew the money wasn't there and it was never going to be there. "It's there now," Daniel said. "Because a stranger showed up at my door. Because you opened it." Lena pressed her palms flat against the table. She breathed in, breathed out. "If I do this," she said, "I have conditions." "Name them." "I'm not your project. I'm not your feel-good story. You don't put my face on your foundation's website. You don't bring cameras to my graduation. You don't tell the press about the poor girl in the cabin." Done. "I'm not done. I work for the internship. I earn it. If I'm not good enough, you fire me like you'd fire anyone else. No special treatment. No kid gloves." "Agreed. And one more thing." "What?" Lena leaned forward. "You bring Ethan back. Not as some staged visit. You bring him here because he asked to come. You bring him because that boy needs something you can't buy. And it's not me. It's a place where people are real, where nobody's performing. Can you do that?" Daniel's jaw worked. He blinked hard, twice. "Yeah," he said. His voice was rough. "I can do that." "Then I'll read your documents." "Does that mean yes?" "It means I'll read your documents. I'm not signing anything at the kitchen table with a cup of tea in my hand. I may be broke, but I'm not reckless." Daniel smiled. A real smile. Not the calculated half-smile she'd seen in magazine photos. A real, unguarded, slightly off-center smile that made him look 10 years younger and 100 times more human. "Fair enough," he said. They sat at that table for 3 more hours. They drank the whole box of tea. He told her about starting Meridian in a garage at 23. She told him about her mother's garden, how she used to grow tomatoes and peppers and trade them with neighbors for milk and eggs. He told her about his wife, her name was Claire, and the way she used to sing off-key in the shower, and how Ethan had her smile. Lena told him about the night her mother died, about sitting in this same chair and listening to the hospice nurse say, "She's gone," and feeling the entire world contract to the size of this kitchen. They didn't touch. They didn't flirt. They sat across a table and traded pieces of their lives like currency, each story a deposit of trust, each silence an acknowledgement that what was forming between them was too fragile and too important to rush. At 6 o'clock, the light coming through the window turned amber. "I should go," Daniel said, "before the mountain road gets dark." "You should." He stood up. She stood up. He walked to the door. She followed. "Lena," he said, hand on the handle. "Yeah. Thank you. Not for that night. For this. For letting me come back." "Don't thank me yet. I haven't signed anything." "I know. But you let me sit in your kitchen for 3 hours. That took more courage than most people would understand." He opened the door. The evening air was cold, but still. No storm, no wind. Just the clean bite of winter fading into spring. "Daniel," she said as he stepped off the porch. He turned. "Ethan's blanket," she said. "The wool one. My mother made it. She made it the winter before she got sick. She said she was making it for her future grandchild." Lena paused. "Tell him to keep it. Tell him it's his now." Daniel stood in the fading light, and for a moment, every wall he'd built, every defense he'd constructed, every careful calculation that had made him a billionaire, all of it dissolved. He was just a man standing in front of a woman who had nothing and kept giving anyway. "I'll tell him," he said. He got in the car. He drove away. Lena stood on the porch until the taillights disappeared down the mountain road. Then she went inside, picked up the folder from the kitchen table, and read every word of both documents, twice. Then she picked up her phone and called Ruth. "Ruth," she said, "I'm going back to school." The scream that came through the phone was so loud, Lena had to hold it away from her ear. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, she laughed. A real laugh. The kind that starts in the belly and rises through the chest and comes out sounding like something breaking free. She hung up and sat in her kitchen. The cabin was quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet now. Not the silence of emptiness. Not the silence of grief. This was the silence that comes after a decision heavy and light at the same time, terrifying, and full of something she hadn't felt in years. She opened the drawer next to her mother's photograph. The white card was still there. She picked it up, looked at it one last time and put it back. She didn't need it anymore. She had the number memorized. She'd dialed it 50 times before she finally pressed call, and every digit was burned into her memory, like a scar that had become a map. Lena closed the drawer and pressed her hand flat against the wood right next to her mother's face in the photograph. "I'm going back, Mama," she whispered. "I promised you I would." The cabin held her words the way it always had, gently, without judgment, the way a home Lena signed the documents on a Tuesday. She sat at the kitchen table with a pen she'd borrowed from Ruth, read every line one more time, and wrote her name at the bottom. Her hand didn't shake. She'd expected it to. She'd expected some trembling, some hesitation, some dramatic moment of doubt, but when the pen touched the paper, her hand was steady. Like it had been waiting for this. She mailed the documents the next morning. 3 days later, she received an acceptance letter from the state university. Full scholarship. Fall semester. Business administration. Because if she was going to rebuild her life, she wanted to understand how the world actually worked, not just the part of the world she'd been surviving in, but the part that made decisions moved. Money opened doors. She gave Ruth 2 weeks' notice at the diner. Ruth cried. Then Ruth yelled at her for making her cry. Then Ruth packed her a bag of food so heavy Lena could barely carry it home. "You call me every Sunday," Ruth said, gripping Lena's shoulders at the diner door on her last day. "Every Sunday. If you miss one, I'm driving to that campus and dragging you back by your ear." "I'll call," Lena said. "And you eat. You hear me? You actually eat. 3 meals. I don't care if you're studying. I don't care if you're busy. You eat. I'll eat. And if that man, if Daniel, if he does anything that makes you uncomfortable, you tell me. I don't care how much money he has. I will drive to that city, and I will—" "Ruth." Lena took her hands. "I'll be okay." Ruth looked at her. Really looked. And what she saw must have convinced her, because she nodded once, pulled Lena into a hug so tight it cracked something in Lena's back, and let her go. "Your mama would be so proud," Ruth whispered. Lena couldn't speak. She just nodded and walked out. The first week of college nearly broke her. Not the classes. The classes were hard, but Lena had spent years managing 2 jobs, a dying mother, and a crumbling house on no sleep and no food. Hard work wasn't the problem. The problem was everything else. The other students were 18, 19 years old. They moved in packs. They laughed about things Lena couldn't relate to: parties, social media complaints about dining hall food that was better than anything she'd eaten in years. They had parents who called to check on them, credit cards for emergencies, roommates who became instant friends. Lena had a single room paid for by the scholarship, and a silence that followed her from the cabin to the campus, like a second shadow. She called Daniel at the end of the first week. It was 10 o'clock at night. She was sitting on the floor of her dorm room because she hadn't bought a chair yet, her back against the wall, her textbooks spread around her like a barricade. He picked up on the second ring. "How's it going?" he asked. "I don't belong here," she said. "Why not?" "Because everyone is a child. Because I'm 7 years older than my classmates, and I've lived more life in the last 2 years than most of them will live in 20. Because the girl across the hall cried today, because her mother sent her the wrong brand of shampoo, and I wanted to shake her and say, 'Your mother is alive and she's thinking about you.' Do you know what I would give for that?" "Did you say that?" "No. I went to my room and sat on the floor. And called me. And called you. Which is probably pathetic." "It's not pathetic, Lena. I'm sitting on the floor of a dorm room at 25 years old, calling a man I barely know because I don't have anyone else to call. That's the definition of pathetic. First of all, you know me. You know things about me that my closest business partners don't know. You know about Claire. You know about Ethan's nightmares. You know that I ate your last bowl of rice and drank your weakest cup of tea, and it was the best meal I'd had in 3 years. That's not barely knowing someone." Lena pulled her knees to her chest. Second, Daniel continued, you're not pathetic, you're terrified. There's a difference. Pathetic is giving up. Terrified is calling someone at 10 o'clock at night and admitting you're struggling. That takes guts. Since when are you a motivational speaker? Since a woman in a cabin told me that wanting to matter wasn't complicated. I've been thinking about that every day. Lena closed her eyes. She pressed the phone against her ear. How's Ethan? She asked. He asked about you today. He asks about you every day. He wanted me to tell you that he's taking care of the blanket. The blanket? He washes it himself. Won't let anyone else touch it. The nanny tried to put it in the laundry last week and he screamed so loud the neighbors called. Lena laughed. It surprised her the sound came out before she could stop it, real and sudden and warm. Tell him I'm proud of him, she said. I will. And Lena? Yeah. Stay. Give it 1 more week. If you still feel like you don't belong after that, we'll figure something else out. But give it 1 more week. She gave it 1 more week, and then another. And then the weeks became a month, and the month became a semester. And somewhere in the grinding dailiness of classes and studying and learning how to be a student again, Lena Carter began to find her footing. She was good at this, better than good. Her professors noticed. She brought something to the classroom that the other students didn't, a rawness, a hunger, a refusal to treat education like something she was owed. She treated it like something she'd been denied, which meant she consumed it with a ferocity that startled people. Her economics professor pulled her aside after the midterm. Carter, he said, you scored highest in the class. Okay, she said. Not okay. Listen to me. You scored highest in a class of 200 students, most of whom have been in school their entire lives. You dropped out 7 years ago. You shouldn't be able to do what you're doing. Is that a compliment or a concern? It's an observation. Where did you learn to analyze systems like this? I grew up poor, Lena said. When you're poor, you learn how everything works. The bills, the interest rates, the late fees, the penalties, the traps. You learn the system because the system is designed to crush you, and the only way to survive is to understand exactly how it operates. The professor stared at her for a long moment. Then he said, Have you considered graduate school? I'm trying to survive undergraduate first. Think about it. She started the internship at Meridian in the spring, splitting her time between classes and the company's regional office 40 minutes from campus by bus. She expected it to be ceremonial, a desk in the corner, busy work, something to justify the paperwork. She was wrong. Her supervisor was a woman named Patricia Voss, VP of Operations, who had been with Meridian for 18 years and had the warmth of a glacier and the expectations of a drill sergeant. On Lena's first day, Patricia dropped a binder on her desk that was 3 inches thick. This is the operational audit for the Southeast Division, Patricia said. It's a mess. I need it reorganized, cross-referenced, and summarized by Friday. Lena looked at the binder. She looked at Patricia. It's Monday, Lena said. I know what day it is. This is 1,000 pages. Closer to 1,200. Is there a problem? Lena picked up the binder. No problem. She finished it by Thursday. Patricia came to her desk, picked up the summary, read it for 20 minutes without speaking, and set it down. Who helped you with this? Patricia asked. Nobody. You reorganized 1,200 pages of operational data, identified 3 redundancies, flagged a billing error that's been costing us $40,000 a quarter, and summarized it in 15 pages. In 4 days. By yourself. Yes. Patricia looked at her the way Lena's economics professor had looked at her. That same mixture of surprise and recalculation. Where did Daniel find you? Patricia asked. On his worst night, Lena said. Patricia didn't ask what that meant. She just nodded and walked away. From that day forward, the busy work stopped. Patricia gave Lena real assignments, the kind that mattered, the kind that touched the nervous system of the company. Daniel called her every few days. Sometimes they talked about work, sometimes about school, sometimes about nothing. The weather, a movie she'd seen, a book he was reading. The conversations grew longer, but they never crossed a line. There was a boundary between them, unspoken but solid, and both of them respected it. Until the night Lena worked late at the office and found herself alone in the break room at 9 o'clock. Her phone rang. Daniel. "You're still there," he said. "How do you know I'm still here?" "Patricia told me. She said you've been working 12-hour days." "Patricia talks to you about me?" "Patricia talks to me about every intern. You're just the only one she talks about with respect." Lena leaned back in her chair. She was tired. The kind of tired that settles into the bones and makes everything feel heavy. "Daniel, can I ask you something?" "Go ahead." "Why do you call me—" "What do you mean?" "I mean, why do you call every few days, sometimes more? You're running a billion-dollar company. You have board meetings, shareholders, 100 fires to put out. Why do you spend your time calling an intern?" Silence on the line, a long one. "Because you're the only person who talks to me like I'm a person," he said. "That's not true. I have employees. I have board members. I have lawyers, accountants, security staff, an assistant who manages my calendar down to the minute. Every single one of them wants something from me. Every single one of them is calculating, positioning, angling. When I walk into a room, people don't see Daniel. They see a net worth. They see leverage. They see opportunity. And me. You see a man who ate your rice and couldn't even get his son to bed on time. You see the guy who showed up at your door with ruined shoes." He paused. "You see me, and I haven't been seen in a very long time." Lena pressed her hand to her forehead. Her heart was doing that thing again, the pounding, the hoping, the dangerous wanting. "Daniel," she said carefully, "we need to be honest about what this is." "What is it?" "I don't know. That's the problem. You're my—" "What are you?" "My benefactor. My boss. My friend. I don't even know what to call this." "Does it need a label?" "Yes, because I'm 25 and I work for your company and you're paying for my education, and if this is something more than friendship, then it's a mess. A big, complicated, unequal mess. You think I don't know that? I think you're used to getting what you want, and I think you're used to the world rearranging itself around your decisions. But I'm not the world, Daniel. I'm a person, and I need to know what I'm walking into." He was quiet for so long she thought the call had dropped. "You're right," he said finally. "You deserve honesty. So here it is. I think about you, more than I should, more than makes sense. I think about the way you held my son. I think about what you said about wanting to matter. I think about you sitting on your dorm room floor calling me because you didn't have anyone else. And I think about how that phone call meant more to me than any conversation I've had in 3 years." Lena's breath caught. "But," he said, "I also know that I'm in a position of power, and you're in a position of vulnerability, and I will not. I will never take advantage of that. So if you want me to stop calling, I'll stop. If you want to keep this professional, it stays professional. You set the terms, Lena. You've always set the terms. From the first night when you told me to get in and shut up, you've been the one in charge. I'm not going to change that now." Lena sat in the break room of his company in a building with his name on it, wearing shoes she'd bought with a stipend from his foundation, and she felt something shift. Not fall shift, like a key turning in a lock she didn't know she had. "I'm not ready," she said. "Okay. I need to finish school. I need to prove to myself, not to you, to myself, that I can stand on my own. I need to know that whatever happens between us happens because I chose it, not because I needed it. Do you understand the difference?" "Yes." "Can you wait?" "Lena, I waited 3 years after Claire died, just to feel something again. I felt it in your cabin on the worst night of my life. I can wait." She closed her eyes. Tears slid down her cheeks. She let them. There was no one to see, and she was tired of holding everything in. "Tell Ethan I said good night," she whispered. "I will. Good night, Lena." "Good night, Daniel." She hung up and sat in the empty break room for another hour. She didn't move. She didn't think. She just let herself feel the weight of what had just happened. The honesty, the restraint, the terrifying tenderness of two people choosing not to rush toward each other because the timing wasn't right. The months rolled on. Lena threw herself into school and work with everything she had. She finished her first year with a 3.9 GPA. Patricia promoted her from intern to junior analyst, a move that raised eyebrows in the company because it had never happened before. But Patricia silenced the whispers with a single sentence in a staff meeting. She earned it. Anyone who disagrees can take it up with the quarterly report she just saved us $2 million on. Daniel kept his distance. He called less often, not because he cared less, but because he was honoring what she'd asked. When they did talk, the conversations were lighter. He told her about taking Ethan to a baseball game. She told him about a study group she'd joined. Normal things. Safe things. The kind of things people share when they're building something slowly and don't want to break it. Ethan came to visit twice. Both times Daniel drove him up to the cabin, which Lena still owned, still went back to on weekends when she could. And both times, the boy ran through the door like he was coming home. He showed Lena his schoolwork. He told her about his friends. He had friends now, 2 of them, which was 2 more than he'd had a year ago. He brought the wool blanket every time and insisted on sleeping with it on the couch. On the second visit, while Ethan was outside exploring the woods behind the cabin, Daniel and Lena sat at the kitchen table. Their table, she'd started thinking of it, which was dangerous, but she couldn't help it, and Daniel said something that stopped her cold. "I fired the nanny," he said. "Which one?" "Number 1314. "All of them. I fired the whole system. I rearranged my schedule. I work from home 3 days a week now. I take Ethan to school. I pick him up. I make dinner badly, but I make it." Lena stared at him. You cook. I burned pasta last week, actual flames. Ethan had to show me how to use the fire extinguisher. A 6-year-old showed you how to use a fire extinguisher. 7. He turned 7 last month. And yes, he was very calm about it. He said, "Dad, you pull the pin first." I think he's going to be an engineer. Lena laughed, and it was the kind of laugh that had roots, deep ones, the kind that grow when someone has been making you smile without trying for a long time. "What made you do it?" she asked. "You," Daniel said. "Something you said that first night, about how I told you I built an empire but couldn't get my son to look at me. That sentence lived in my head for months. It played on repeat. Every time I signed a deal or took a meeting or spent another evening in an office while someone else put my son to bed, I heard your voice saying it. I wasn't trying to hurt you. You weren't. You were telling the truth. And the truth doesn't hurt, it rearranges. It took everything I thought I knew about being a father and rearranged it. I realized I'd been outsourcing the only job that actually mattered." Lena reached across the table and put her hand on his. It was the first time she'd touched him since the night she grabbed his arm in the doorway of the cabin, steadying him as he stumbled inside with Ethan in his arms. His hand was warm. Solid. He didn't move. He didn't grab. He just let her hand rest on his, and they sat like that for a long moment, 2 people at a kitchen table in a cabin in the mountains, letting something grow at its own pace. "I'm almost done," Lena said. "With what? With proving it to myself, that I can stand on my own, that I'm not a project or a story or someone who needed rescuing." She paused. "I'm almost ready, Daniel." He turned his hand over and held hers. "Take your time," he said. "I've taken a year. Take another if you need it." "I don't need another year." She met his eyes. "I just need to know one thing. Anything. If I let this happen, if I let us happen, will you see me? Not the girl from the cabin. Not the scholarship recipient. Not the story. Me. The woman I'm becoming. Even when she's difficult. Even when she's proud. Even when she picks a fight because she's scared of being happy." Daniel held her hand tighter. "Lena," he said, "I've been seeing you since the moment you opened that door with a baseball bat and told me to get in." She didn't smile. She didn't cry. She did something harder than both she believed him. Outside, Ethan's voice carried through the trees, calling out to a bird or a squirrel or whatever it was that had caught his attention. The sound of a child playing. The sound of a child who was no longer afraid. Lena listened to it, and she held Daniel's hand, and she let herself sit inside a moment that didn't need to be anything more than what it was. Two people choosing each other, with their eyes open, fully aware of the risk, fully aware of the cost, and fully willing to pay it. She didn't say yes. Not out loud. Not yet. But she didn't let go of his hand either. And Daniel, who had built a billion-dollar empire on reading the room, understood perfectly. She didn't let go of his hand that afternoon, and she didn't let go in the months that followed, not literally, but in every way that mattered. Something had unlocked between them at that kitchen table, something that had been building since the first night, and once it was open, neither of them tried to close it again. But Lena Carter was not a woman who did anything halfway, and she was not about to abandon the promise she'd made to herself. She had one more semester, one more round of exams, one more stretch of proving that she could stand in a room full of people who'd had every advantage she hadn't and hold her ground. So she held it. She went back to campus. She studied. She worked at Meridian 3 days a week and attended classes the other 4. She called Daniel at night, and the conversations shifted slowly, carefully, the way a river changes course. They talked about Ethan's second-grade teacher, who Daniel couldn't stand. They talked about a contract Lena had flagged at work that saved the company a licensing dispute. They argued about coffee. She drank it black, he loaded his with cream and sugar, and she told him that was a character flaw. He told her that her stubbornness was a character flaw. She told him stubbornness was the only reason he was still in her life. They laughed more. That was the thing she noticed most. The laughter. Not the polite kind. Not the performance kind. The ugly, stupid snorting kind that happens when two people know each other well enough to stop being careful. And through it all, Lena kept one eye on the finish line. The ceremony was in May. Lena stood backstage in a rented gown, holding her cap in both hands, and her legs wouldn't stop shaking. Not from nerves about the stage. She'd faced worse than a stage. It was something else, something deeper. Something that went all the way back to a hospital room where her mother had squeezed her hand and said, "Promise me, Lena. Promise me you'll go back." "I'm going back, Mama," she'd whispered in the cabin the night she signed Daniel's documents. And now she was here. And her mother was not. Her phone buzzed, a text from Daniel. "3rd row, left side. Ethan wants you to know he made a sign." Lena laughed and pressed the phone to her chest. "Carter, Lena," the announcer called. She walked out. The lights were bright. The applause was general, the kind that rolls through a crowd of 2,000 people, politely acknowledging each name. She crossed the stage, shook the dean's hand, accepted the leather folder, and turned to walk off. And then she saw them. 3rd row, left side. Daniel in a suit, not a boardroom suit, a This Matters suit, the kind a man wears when he wants to look like a father, not a CEO. And next to him, standing on his chair, holding a piece of poster board over his head with both hands, was Ethan. The sign read in uneven 7-year-old handwriting, "Miss Lena is the bravest." Lena stopped walking. She stood on the edge of the stage and looked at that sign, and every wall she'd ever built, every defense, every deflection, every "I'm fine," every swallowed tear, every night of grinding through exhaustion, because stopping meant feeling all of it cracked. She pressed her hand to her mouth. The crowd didn't understand. To them, she was just another graduate, one more name in a long list. But Daniel understood, and Ethan understood, and somewhere in whatever place the dead go when they've kept their promises through the living, Lena believed her mother understood too. She walked off the stage. She went straight to the 3rd row. Ethan jumped off his chair and ran to her, and she caught him and lifted him and held him so tight he squeaked. "You came," she said. "Dad said no cameras," Ethan said. "But I made a sign. Is that okay?" "That's more than okay, buddy." Daniel stood behind his son. He didn't reach for her. He waited. Because he always waited. Because he'd learned from her from that first night, from every conversation since that Lena Carter came to you on her own terms or not at all. She set Ethan down and looked at Daniel. I did it, she said. You did it. No cameras. No cameras, no press, no Marcus. Just me and a 7-year-old with a poster board. You followed the rules. Every single one. Lena took a breath. A long one. The kind that separates everything that came before from everything that comes after. I'm ready now, she said. Daniel's eyes changed. Not dramatically. Not the way it happens in movies. Just a softening. A release. Like a man who's been holding his breath for a year, finally letting it go. Yeah, he said. Yeah. He stepped forward and put his arms around her, and she let him, and they stood in the middle of a graduation crowd surrounded by families and balloons and noise, and held each other like two people who had earned this. Every mile of it. Every night of it. Every phone call and every silence and every moment of choosing patience over impulse. Ethan tugged on Daniel's jacket. Are we going to get ice cream now? He asked. They got ice cream, all three of them at a shop on Main Street sitting on a bench outside because it was warm enough and because Ethan insisted on watching the pigeons. Lena had mint chocolate chip. Daniel had vanilla because he was, in Lena's words, the most boring man alive. Ethan had something with sprinkles and gummy bears that shouldn't have been legal. So what happens now? Daniel asked, watching Ethan chase a pigeon. Now I work, Lena said. The internship ends in June. Patricia offered me a full-time position. I know, she told me. Does Patricia tell you everything? Patricia tells me what she thinks I need to hear. She thinks very highly of you, Lena, and Patricia doesn't think highly of anyone. I once saw her make a senior VP cry in a meeting. She tried that with me, Lena said. I didn't cry. I know. That's why she promoted you. Lena took a bite of her ice cream and watched Ethan, who had given up on the pigeon and was now attempting to balance on the edge of the curb with his arms out. I don't want special treatment, she said. You've said that. I'm saying it again. At the company. In your life. Wherever this goes. I need you to hear me. I am not interested in being the CEO's girlfriend who got a corner office because she's sleeping with the boss. First of all, you're not sleeping with the boss. Not yet. Daniel nearly dropped his ice cream. Lena grinned. Second, he said, recovering. You wouldn't last a day in a corner office. You'd be bored in an hour. Patricia has you running operational audits that save the company millions. You don't need a corner office. You need a challenge. I need you to trust that I can build something on my own. I've trusted that since the night you fed me your last meal and told me it wasn't complicated. You don't need me to believe in you, Lena. You need me to get out of your way. She looked at him. This man, this impossible, infuriating patient man who had stumbled onto her porch with frozen shoes and a dying phone, and a child who hadn't smiled in months. Who had sat in her cabin and told her about his dead wife. Who had left a card on her counter and waited 3 weeks without calling. Who had given her a scholarship and called it an investment. Who had held her hand at a kitchen table and said, "Take your time." Like he meant it, because he did. I love you, she said. The words came out the way everything came out of Lena Carter, direct, unhesitating, and a little bit terrifying. Daniel went very still. You don't have to say it back, she said. I'm not saying it because I expect, I love you too. Don't interrupt me. You just told me you love me, and then started making a disclaimer. I'm not letting you talk yourself out of it. I wasn't talking myself out of it. You were preparing an exit strategy. I've watched you do it for a year. Every time something good happens, you build a door in case you need to leave. I'm telling you right now, there's no door. Not from me. I'm in this. Lena's eyes burned. She blinked hard. You're annoyingly perceptive, she said. I run a billion-dollar company. Perceptive is my job. Your job is making money. My job was making money. Now my job is sitting on a bench eating bad vanilla ice cream with a woman who scares me and a son who just put gummy bears in a pigeon's water." They both looked at Ethan, who had indeed dropped a handful of gummy bears into the fountain the pigeons were drinking from. He looked back at them with complete innocence. "Ethan?" Daniel called. "What are you doing?" "They looked hungry, Dad." Lena buried her face in her hands and laughed until her sides ached. The months that followed were not a fairy tale. Lena would not have allowed a fairy tale. Fairy tales happened to princesses who waited in towers, and Lena Carter had never waited for anything in her life. She took the full-time position at Meridian. She moved to the city, not into Daniel's house, which he offered twice, and she refused twice, but into a small apartment 12 minutes from the office, paid for with her own salary. "You could live with us," Daniel said, standing in her empty apartment on move-in day, holding a box of kitchen supplies. "I could," Lena said. "And I will. When it's time." "When is it time?" "When your son asks me, not you, him." Daniel set down the box. "Why, Ethan?" "Because this isn't about us. It was never just about us. It's about a boy who walked through a storm and found someone who told him he was brave. If I move into your house, I'm not moving in with a CEO. I'm moving in with a kid who needs to know that the people in his life stay. And that decision should be his." Daniel stood in her kitchen and looked at her with an expression she'd seen only once before, the night she'd told him wanting to matter wasn't complicated. It was the expression of a man encountering something he'd forgotten existed. "You're the most stubborn person I've ever met," he said. "You've said that. I'll keep saying it. Fine. Put the box on the counter and go pick up your son from school. You're going to be late." He kissed her forehead the first time he'd done that, quick and warm and gone before she could react, and walked out. Lena stood in her apartment in her city, with her job and her degree and her life that she'd built with her own hands, and the help of people who believed in her, and she pressed her fingers to the spot where his lips had been, and she smiled. Summer turned to fall. Fall turned to winter. The anniversary of the storm crept closer, and Lena felt it the way you feel. Weather changing in the bones, in the blood, in the place where memory lives. Daniel felt it too. He called her on a Thursday night, 2 weeks before the anniversary. "I want to go back," he said. "To the cabin. On the night." "Why?" "Because that's where it started. And I have something I need to do there." "That's vague. Trust me." "The last time you said trust me, you turned out to be a billionaire." "This is better." Lena agreed because despite everything, despite the pride and the stubbornness and the constant exhausting vigilance against being rescued, she trusted Daniel Reed. She trusted him the way you trust someone who has seen you at your worst and stayed. They drove up on a Saturday, all three of them. Daniel at the wheel. Lena in the passenger seat. Ethan in the back clutching the wool blanket he still refused to relinquish, narrating every tree and rock and bird he saw through the window with the manic enthusiasm of a 7-year-old on a road trip. The cabin had been renovated. Daniel had arranged it months ago with Lena's reluctant permission. New roof, insulation, a working furnace. The electricity paid up for 3 years. But the bones of the house were the same walls, the same kitchen, the same porch, where a man had knocked on the coldest night of the year. They pulled up, and Ethan was out of the car before the engine stopped. "This is it," he shouted, running to the porch. "This is the house, Dad. This is the house." "I know, buddy." "This is where Miss Lena saved us." Lena opened her door and stepped out. The mountain air hit her face clean and cold and painfully familiar. She looked at the cabin and felt every version of herself that had ever lived inside it. The child who'd chased fireflies in the yard. The teenager who'd sat on the porch doing homework while her mother cooked inside. The young woman who'd held her mother's hand in the bedroom as the machines beeped slower and slower. The girl who'd opened the door to a stranger because a child was cold. She walked to the porch and ran her hand along the railing. New wood. Smooth. But underneath, in the corner post, she could still feel the groove where she'd carved her initials when she was 9. LC. Still there. Still holding. Daniel came up behind her. Ethan had already gone inside, and she could hear him running from room to room, rediscovering everything with the joy of someone who associated this place with the best night of his life. "Lena," Daniel said. She turned. He was holding something. A small box. Not a ring box bigger. Wooden. Handmade by the look of it, with uneven edges and a latch that didn't quite sit flush. "Ethan made it," Daniel said. "In art class. He's been working on it for 3 weeks. He wouldn't let me see it until today." He opened the box. Inside were 3 things. A drawing crayon on construction paper of a house with 3 stick figures standing in front of it. One tall one, medium one small. Above them in careful wobbly letters, "Our family." Next to the drawing was a key, a real one brass on a simple ring, and beneath the key was a folded piece of paper. Lena took the paper and unfolded it. It was a letter written in a second grader's handwriting full of misspellings and crossed out words, and the kind of honesty that only a child can produce. "Dear Miss Lena, my dad said I should write you a letter because you need to hear it from me. I want you to come live with us. Not because you're nice and not because you make good rice. Because when I was cold, you made me warm. And now I don't want to be cold agin. Please say yes. Love, Ethan. P.S. The key is for our house. Dad said, you're the only one who gets one." Lena read it twice. 3 times. The letters blurred. She pressed the paper to her chest. Daniel watched her. He didn't speak. He'd said everything he needed to say a long time ago. This moment belonged to his son. Ethan appeared in the doorway. "Did you read it?" he asked. His face was anxious, the face of a child who has put his whole heart into something and is waiting to see if it was enough. Lena crouched down so she was eye level with him. "I read it," she said. "Did I spell everything right?" "Not even close. Dad helped with the hard words. He did a terrible job." "I know." Ethan's lip trembled. "Miss Lena." "Yeah, buddy. Are you going to say yes?" Lena looked at this boy. This small, resilient, impossible boy who had walked through a blizzard in his father's arms and woken up in a stranger's house and decided with the absolute certainty that only children possess that this stranger was his person, who had carried a wool blanket for a year like a talisman, who had made a box with his own hands and written a letter with his own words, and was standing in a doorway asking the only question that mattered. "Come here," she said. He ran to her, and she caught him, and held him, and he held her back, and Daniel stood on the porch of the house where everything had begun, and watched the 2 people he loved most in the world choose each other. "Is that a yes?" Ethan whispered into her shoulder. "That's a yes," Lena said. Ethan pulled back and looked at his father. "She said yes." "I heard," Daniel said. His voice was steady, but his eyes weren't. Not even close. Lena stood up with Ethan on her hip. He was getting big, almost too big for this, but she held him anyway and looked at Daniel. "You planned this," she said. "I planned the drive. The box was all him. And the key." "That was his idea too," he said, and I quote, "Dad, if she has a key, she can't leave." Lena looked at the key in the box. Brass, simple, real. "He's right," she said. "If I have a key, I can't leave." "Is that okay?" "That's the whole point, Daniel." She took the key out of the box and put it in her pocket. It was small and cold, and heavier than it should have been, the way things are heavy when they carry more meaning than their size suggests. They went inside. Ethan dragged Lena to the couch, the same couch where he'd slept that first night, and demanded she tell him a story. Not a new story. The story. Their story. How he came to her door. How she wrapped him in a blanket. How she told him he was brave. "Tell it again," he said. "From the beginning." So she did. She sat on the couch with Ethan curled against her side and Daniel sitting across from them, and she told the story the way it happened. All of it. The cold and the fear and the knock at the door, and the rice and the tea, and the dawn that changed everything. She told it without polish, without embellishment, without making herself into a hero. She told it the way you tell the truth plainly, with all the rough edges left in. When she finished, Ethan was asleep. His head was on her lap. His hand was gripping her sleeve. The wool blanket was draped over both of them. Daniel moved to the couch and sat beside her. He put his arm around her shoulders, and she leaned into him, and they sat in the cabin that had held so much grief and hunger and loneliness, and a single light burning in a window on the worst night of the year, and they let it hold this too. "Daniel," Lena said quietly. "Yeah. You asked me once what I needed. That first night. You asked me what I needed, and I said I wanted to matter. I remember. I matter now." She said it simply, without drama, without tears. A statement of fact arrived at through pain and work, and the slow, stubborn accumulation of proof. I matter to your son. I matter to you. I matter to myself, and that's enough. It was always enough, Daniel said. You just couldn't see it. I could. I just didn't believe it. And now I believe it. She tilted her head up and kissed him. Not the first kiss she'd imagined, not dramatic or breathless or cinematic. A real kiss, the kind that happens between two people who have waited long enough to know exactly what it means. Warm and certain and unhurried. When she pulled back, Ethan stirred on her lap. Gross, he muttered, eyes still closed. Go to sleep, Daniel said. I'm asleep. That was sleep talking. Lena laughed, and then Daniel laughed, and the sound filled the small cabin the way warmth fills a cold room, gradually completely reaching into every corner and crack until there was no cold left. Outside, the first snow of the season began to fall, soft and quiet the way it does in the mountains covering the world in white. A year ago, that snow had been an enemy bitter, relentless, the kind that traps you and threatens everything. Tonight it was something else. Tonight it was just snow, beautiful and ordinary, and falling on a house where three people sat together warm and fed and whole inside a life they had built from nothing but a knock on a door and the courage to open it. Lena Carter had spent 25 years learning how to survive. Now, in a cabin on a mountain with a sleeping boy in her lap, and a man who had seen her at her worst and chosen to stay, she was finally learning how to live. Because sometimes the door you open for a stranger becomes the door to your own future. And sometimes the night you have nothing left to give is the night you discover that what you have is everything.